You know, the Beatles are subject to a huge amount of speculation because you also had that famous picture of the Beatles with the baby dolls and the heads falling off,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
they were, of course, hanging around Jimmy Savile at the beginning of Britain's pop revolution. So it's I
Well,
mean, you're
everybody
closely, yeah, well,
was.
absolutely, but you're closely
Yeah.
connected to all of that, which is extraordinary.
Well, of course. Yeah, yeah. Of course. And as I told you in our chat this morning, I mean, this is all. I mean, this is really pretty. I mean, the again, to go back to the eclipse, that's what an eclipse like this does. It speeds everything up. So, you know, my whole research into my father's life and the Beatles. I'm writing this book about my life called Blackbird. I told you every chapter in the book is a Beatles song. It deals with my experience of black magic. That's why it's called Blackbird in my family. I mean, the I was actually researching all this stuff about the signing of the Beatles and how the story of that is not actually correctly told. Mark Lewison has told it correctly, and it's not the story my father told me or put out at all. So there is a lot of mystery there and a lot of secrecy. And what a synchronicity is it that you were telling me about that book, the Shadow of the Bassman today, which I've never heard of, and I agreed to narrate a book called the Memoirs of Billy Shears about 5 years ago, which were because I do a great McCartney impersonation because I'm a great actor, and I was around the Beatles, so I could we'll have our conversation about that.
Oh no, no, let's do that now because I want to see
Oh,
your
all right,
Paul
go ahead.
McCartney.
You could
And
number one, you go. You're John Lennon.
no,
Go.
you got to do Paul McCartney first.
It's all right, John and I were just like this, and it's all right. He was always flicking his hair in the back, and like it's all good. Woo!
Woo!
Woo! Come on then,
Right.
John.
I'll do John. And a man came down on a cloud and he said, "You are Beatles with an A, so we were."
That is really good.
Where we going, John? To the top. Which top? The very top.
And what did George Harrison call LSD? The dreaded lysergic. Look like rope.
My favorite John Lennon quote: "Death is like getting out of one car and
Yeah.
getting into another."
Well, that's
Forever.
what's weird. That's what's amazing about him because he could say things like that and feel that, but he was so fucked up. I mean, so. But and to go back to the whole thing with the Shadow of the Basement, that book I have to get because I didn't realize when this guy called me and asked me to narrate a book about the idea that Paul's death had been faked. I didn't believe that when I was growing up.
Well, no,
Um,
his death wasn't faked. He died in 1966 and was replaced by Billy
right.
Shears,
Sorry.
wasn't he?
Yeah, right. So, but that whole concept seemed to me ridiculous.
Yeah.
But now it doesn't seem ridiculous. And I was kind of, I did it because the guy, I didn't understand. I thought actually when the guy asked me to narrate this book, you can buy it online. It's called the Billy Shears, Memoir of Billy Shears. I thought it was kind of like it was a parody. Then I realized he actually believed it. But now I understand. I'm beginning to come around to your point of view. And frankly, when I think about Paul, because I've been around him so much, it sort of seems plausible because I met him when I was very, very young, and he's certainly not the person. I think about it that he was when I met. So I believe it.
Well, I look. I don't know either way for a fact. I just think it's very interesting. And
Yeah,
when you get deep into the Tavistock Institute, Jimmy Savile was more than just a paedophile. He was a literal magician, and he followed in the line of Aleister Crowley, who was a deep, deep magician, as was John Dee, and lots of other people along the way, like W.B. Yeats. The MI6 itself,
right.
has the all-seeing eye as a logo because it's an esoteric organization. It isn't just Bond spies, girls, cars. It's deeply, deeply esoteric.
Right.
So, and part of I think John Dee's deal was the blood of children was required in exchange for the information, and that is not something I can verify. It's something I've read over the years, and no holds barred. I've just got a very open mind to these things, and I think I actually met somebody recently who knew somebody else who was related via marriage to a very famous man in Ireland who I'm not going to give away his identity yet, but because this is quite new information. And she knew him for 30 years and thought he was lovely. And I said to her, there's no way he was lovely, because look what he did in the entertainment industry. Impossible for him to not be dark.
Who was the person?
I'm not gonna mention his name because it'll give away, it's too personal.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, she came. I saw her recently, and she said, "Do you know what? I'm starting to piece things together now." And because it could be, people could, you could take offense to me saying that, because Paul McCartney, you could
No,
very
I
easily
don't.
take
No,
you could very
but
easily take offense to
yeah,
it. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
I don't say these things to be offensive. I'm saying there's a lot of people with a lot of evidence that say this stuff, and
sure. No, I
why would they?
completely understand.
Why would they?
No, I completely understand. It's like when I did reach out to Mark Lewison. Is a lot of your audience will know, is the man who's documented the whole Beatles story more deeply and more powerfully than anybody, any other human being. And he was the one who uncovered this truth that my father was forced to sign the Beatles by the managing director of EMI, who wanted to punish him because he was having an affair with his secretary, and the chairman of EMI was a very staunch Catholic and disapproved. My father was on the point of being fired, and he didn't get the Beatles. He was actually made to. He didn't want to, groups were not what anyone was looking for. In fact, when my father told me that, when he first saw the Beatles, he thought, well, because everyone was looking for Elvis, let's make it Paul McCartney and the Beatles. So, but he this is part of the book, but Mark has documented it. And a lot of people who are huge Beatles fans are, very they were very shocked by that. Can you still hear me? Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go. So Mark Lewis.
I've just pulled
Thank you.
Mark's
So
webpage.
I'm mentioning this because I actually reached out to Mark last night saying, I want to get together with you because not just because of this, but also because I think Mark would be a great consultant on this TV show I'm doing called The Circus, which is about rock and roll in the 60s. But it's Mark has documented it. A lot of Beatles fans, my father's fans, are kind of shocked by it, but it is the truth. And my father was really good at putting out the opposite idea, that he was the guy that just found them and all that stuff. But they were actually, here's the truth. When the Beatles so-called auditioned for EMI, for Parlophone, they had already been signed. He had to work with them, and he didn't want to. And he didn't want them to so badly that he didn't attend the first audition until somebody came up. And, yeah, he didn't. Until Norman, I think it was Norman Smith, or an engineer, like it was Norman Smith, I think, or Richard Rush. One of the engineers ran upstairs and said, "You got to listen to these guys; they're really interesting." And the reason EMI signed them was because they wanted two of the songs that Paul and John had written. And again, the upper brass of EMI were very, very disapproving of the fact my father was having an affair with his secretary, who was my stepmother. So this is really, that's just a very interesting story about the whole Beatle thing. And the funny thing, since we're talking about Paul, having been close to him for so long, Paul is one of the most insecure people I've ever met in my entire life. Phil Collins, who's a fantastic, fantastic guy and a fantastic musician, tells a great story, of how, this is the kind of thing Paul would do. He was at, Phil and Paul were at one of the Queen's garden parties. And, it was a time when Paul was with Heather Mills. And Phil, Phil played the drums on Golden Slumbers with Paul for a charity concert my father did in 1997 for the Arnhem Monstrat, which had been destroyed by a volcano. So they knew each other. I mean, but Phil had a copy of Paul's autobiography. He was with his girlfriend, and he went up to Paul and said, "Would you mind signing this to my daughter?" And Phil tells you can check this out online. Phil said this in the Daily Mail. He said it was just really awful because what Paul did was turn to Heather and say, "Oh, Heather, isn't it sweet? Little Phil," because Phil's, a short guy. Little Phil wants me to sign his book. It's that kind of cocky arrogance that Paul has, combined with a tremendous insecurity about, who he really is. I mean, so, it's the whole thing. We're only people, right? We're all people.
Well, if you've taken over somebody's personality and pretended to be them for 50, 60 years, you would be insecure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but it certainly rings true.
Yeah. I'm writing a book called Blackbird, That's a Beatles song, of course. And every chapter of the book is titled by the Beatles song. And it's called Blackbird because, well, very soon. It's called Blackbird because of a member of my family who was a blackbird, my stepmother. And it's a truth-telling book about my experience of absolute evil in my life and therefore in the music industry. So that's probably a good place to begin. I mean, where else could you possibly, because, with the music industry, having, grown up with the Beatles, as a child, a really small child, I've seen it all. And, what's happening with P. Diddy and, what's going to happen to Clive Davis and a lot of people. I mean, this is very serious stuff, but it's all about the purification of the planet, because the entertainment industry, as I'm sure you know, has been co-opted like every other industry by whatever you want to call the forces of darkness are. It's the same thing. And so what do you think about this whole story that Paul McCartney died in 1967 in a car crash?
Well, funny you should ask. We've interviewed a gentleman, he goes by the name The Sage of Quay, Mike Williams. We're going to be having him on the show live on May 10th.
Yeah.
And to me, the story, while at first I wasn't sure about, it is now resonating with me a bit more because, there's certain components like Billy Shears, the Billy Shears component. They talk about Billy Shears in Sgt. Pepper. So that component alone, and listening to certain things that Mike has talked about and the drum tracks that have been on the Beatles songs. Yeah, I would just say definitely check out The Sage of Quay. So I can see that being a possibility for sure. I wouldn't be surprised anymore. Let's put it that way.
Well, and the leveraging of pop culture on the from the intelligence community is, that's a widely tracked thing now, and I think that was really the advent of that to a large degree.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Yeah, how about, what do you think? Because we saw you on our dear friend Mark Attwood show, and 2 years ago you were not so, and now you could. It sounded like you could see that that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, I do. Because of what's happened over the last 2 years, and look, obviously, I was so young, so I met. If there were two Pauls, I met both of them. I just know. I can see. I don't like Paul McCartney at all. I think he's very insecure and mean. Can be very mean. And this is known publicly. Phil Collins, who I think is a fantastic artist, tells a story about. Having done, played drums on Golden Slumbers from Abbey Road at my father's concert, magnificent concert for Montserrat, the island where he had his studio at the Royal Albert Hall. The end. Just Google concert for Montserrat. It's an incredible concert. Everybody who played or recorded at Montserrat, which was destroyed by a volcano in 1997, was at that concert. And the end was the finale was Hey Jude and Golden Slumbers from the back end of Abbey Road, which Paul had never played live, and Paul couldn't even remember how to play it at the rehearsal. But incredible lineup, like Elton John, Eric Clapton, Sting, Martin Knopfler, Paul, Phil Collins on drums. Phil tells this story about how he wound up at the Queen's garden party, or a garden party given by the Queen a couple of years later, and he happened to he'd heard that Paul was going to be there, and he brought along a copy of Paul's book, and at that point Paul was with Heather Mills, and he went up to Paul, because again they knew each other as musicians, and Phil asked Paul if he'd sign the book for his daughter. And this story is out there. It's in the Daily, out there in the sense that it's publicly known. It's in the Daily Mail. Phil spoke about it. Paul apparently turned to Heather and said, "Oh, Heather, isn't that sweet? Little Phil," because Phil's short, is asking me to give him my autograph. So Paul has that side to him that I think is massively insecure. Whether he's Billy Shears or not, that's what it's like. to be Paul McCartney. I wouldn't want to be him for all the tea in China. But the whole thing about the Billy Shears thing is I was asked by a guy to narrate a book he'd written, which was like the memoirs of Billy Shears some years ago. And I did it because I do a very good Paul McCartney impersonation. Obviously, being an actor, being a talented actor, I can impersonate the Beatles because I grew up around them. So I did this book, but it was only, and actually I got him a great deal. We recorded it at Martin Office Studio in London, and where they have the old Abbey Road desks, the 4-track desks. And at one point I thought, this is kind of, it felt kind of crazy. And I said, do you actually believe this? Because I thought it was a satire when he first said it. He said, yeah, I do. I thought, okay. And but over time, during COVID, I come to believe with the co-opting of entertainment, which is very, very correct, Scott and Joe. I mean, that's absolutely true. Because why would they co-opt entertainment? It's such a powerful tool that could be a reality, because they become the Beatles, who are so incredible. They become so mundane and boring.
Yeah, well, I didn't know we were going to have that discussion on that topic. I appreciate going there already.
Sorry, sorry, I do that.
No need to apologize. That's fantastic.